At 68, I honestly believed my life was over. Not because I was sick, not because I was alone, but because every month, after paying my bills, I was left wondering which expense I could no longer afford. My pension wasn't terrible by Western standards, around the equivalent of 15 million rupiah a month. But back home, it felt like I was slowly disappearing. Every year, prices climbed. Every year, my world became smaller. Then, one afternoon, I booked a one-way ticket to Indonesia. Everyone told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Looking back now, they were right. It was the biggest decision of my life, just not for the reason they expected. I spent 42 years working. I wasn't rich, I wasn't poor. I simply did what millions of people do. I worked, I paid taxes, I saved what I could. I dreamed about retirement. I imagined peaceful mornings, long walks, and finally having time to enjoy life. Reality looked very different. The house I'd once loved became too expensive to maintain. Utility bills seemed to double overnight. Groceries that once filled my shopping cart barely covered half of it. Friends moved away. Some passed away. Others became too busy with their own families. Days became painfully quiet. The television stayed on longer than it should have. Not because I was watching, just because I hated the silence. My children wanted me to move closer. I considered it, but I didn't want to become another aging parent waiting for weekend visits. I wanted to feel alive again. Late one evening, while browsing videos online, I came across people talking about life in Bali, then Lombok, then parts of Java. They weren't showing luxury villas. They weren't pretending life was perfect. They were simply smiling. It had been a long time since I'd seen that kind of smile. Something inside me woke up. Maybe I wasn't searching for a cheaper life. Maybe I was searching for a new one. 3 months later, I sold most of my furniture, packed 2 suitcases, and boarded a flight. I still remember stepping out of the airport. The warm air wrapped around me like a blanket. Scooters buzzed past from every direction. People smiled for no obvious reason. Someone I'd never met carried one of my bags without asking for anything in return. Everything felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. The first few weeks weren't easy. I couldn't understand half the conversations around me. Simple errands took twice as long. I accidentally ordered food so spicy that my eyes watered before I finished the first bite. I struggled with paperwork, bank accounts, phone cards. Even finding the right supermarket felt like an adventure. Some nights, I questioned everything. Had I made a terrible mistake? Had I chased a fantasy created by travel videos? Life wasn't magically easier just because I had crossed an ocean. There were frustrating days, power outages, internet problems, rain that arrived without warning, and moments when I desperately missed familiar faces. But something else was happening. Every morning I found myself walking more, talking more, smiling more. The small cafe near my apartment began recognizing me. The woman who sold fruit remembered exactly what I liked. The security guard greeted me by name every single day. Back home, months could pass without anyone noticing if I stayed inside. Here, people noticed, not because I was a foreigner, because I was part of the neighborhood. My 15 million rupiah each month suddenly stretched much further. I wasn't living extravagantly. I didn't need to. I rented a modest place, enjoyed fresh meals, drank coffee while watching rice fields instead of traffic jams. For the first time in years, I stopped worrying every time I opened my banking app. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was emotional. Then came the day that changed everything. I had decided to rent a scooter. Everyone told me to be careful. They were right. One afternoon, I misjudged a turn on a narrow road. Nothing serious happened. I wasn't badly hurt. But the scooter tipped over, and I sat there feeling embarrassed and shaken. Before I could even stand, people came running. Not one person, several. Someone lifted the scooter. Another handed me water. An elderly man checked my arm to make sure nothing was broken. A young woman translated when I couldn't understand what others were saying. Nobody asked if I had insurance. Nobody demanded payment. Nobody looked annoyed that I had blocked the road for a few minutes. They simply helped. One man patted my shoulder and smiled. He said, "Slow is okay. You're home now." I don't think he realized what those words meant to me. You're home now. I nearly cried, because for years I hadn't felt at home anywhere, not even in the country where I'd spent most of my life. That moment stayed with me. Life after that wasn't perfect. I still had difficult days. I caught a stomach bug once. I struggled with bureaucracy more than once. The tropical heat sometimes exhausted me. I occasionally missed my family so much it physically hurt. Growing older doesn't suddenly become easy just because you move abroad. But my life had meaning again. I joined language classes, made friends from Indonesia, Australia, Britain, Germany, and America. Some were retired like me. Others were building entirely new lives. We weren't running away from something. We were running toward hope. People often ask whether 15 million rupiah a month is enough. My answer surprises them. Enough for what? If you're chasing luxury, probably not. If you need imported products every day, maybe not. If you're expecting 5-star living on a modest pension, you'll be disappointed. But if what you really want is peace, time, connection, fresh food, beautiful mornings, conversations that aren't rushed, then yes, it can be enough. Not because Indonesia is cheap, because it reminds you that happiness doesn't always become more expensive. Sometimes it becomes simpler. When I video call my children now, they tell me I look younger. I laugh more, I sleep better, I even cook again. They worried I'd be lonely living so far away. Ironically, I've never felt more connected. Would I recommend everyone retire in Indonesia? No, absolutely not. This country isn't for everyone. You'll need patience, flexibility, respect for a different culture. You'll need to accept that life won't work exactly the way it did back home. But if you're willing to let go of the idea that comfort only comes from familiarity, you may discover something extraordinary. At 68, I thought retirement meant watching life slowly fade away. Instead, I found myself starting over. Not with more money, not with perfect health, not with certainty, just with enough courage to buy a one-way ticket. Looking back, I don't measure my success by how much money I saved. I measure it by something far more valuable. For the first time in many years, I wake up excited to see what today brings. And at my age, that's worth more than any pension could ever buy.
One afternoon, months later, there was a small ceremony in the village, a Thanksgiving for the harvest. Wayan invited me. I stood among people I barely knew, in clothes I had borrowed, watching offerings of flowers and rice being placed with such care and gratitude. I realized I hadn't felt gratitude like that in years. Not for a harvest, not for anything. I had been so focused on what I lost that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply be thankful for a day, for a meal, for people willing to include a stranger in their traditions. That was the moment everything changed for me. Not a single dramatic event, but a quiet realization. I hadn't come to Bali to find paradise. I had come to remember what it felt like to matter to someone, even in a small way. And somehow, in a warung with a woman who couldn't speak my language, I had found exactly that. It has been almost 3 years now. My Indonesian is still far from perfect, but it's enough. I know my neighbors by name. I know which stall sells the best coffee, and I know Wayan's grandchildren call me Om, now Uncle, as if I have always belonged here. My house is small, nothing like the one I sold in Manchester, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels lived in. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights I doubted everything, nights I questioned whether I had thrown away my old life for nothing. But looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see back then. Home was never about the size of the house or the country on my passport. Home was about being seen, being welcomed, being fed by someone who didn't need to understand my language, to understand my loneliness. I came to Indonesia broken and unsure at an age when most people believe it's too late to start over. But it wasn't too late. It was exactly the right time. And if there's one thing I would tell anyone standing where I once stood, staring at an empty house, wondering if they have the courage to leave, it's this. Sometimes you have to lose everything familiar to find what you were actually searching for all along. I still remember the exact moment I signed the papers to sell my house. 31 years in that home, 31 years of birthdays, holidays, and a marriage that ended in silence long before it ended on paper. I sat in my car afterward and cried, not because I was sad to lose the house, but because I finally understood how empty it had become. I was 67 years old. My pension was barely covering my bills in Manchester. My children had their own lives, their own children, their own reasons not to call as often as I hoped. And every night I sat alone in a house built for a family that no longer existed. I had seen videos online, people my age starting over in Bali, sunsets, warm smiles, a slower pace of life. I told myself it was a fantasy, something for younger people with more courage than me. But one night, after another silent dinner for one, I opened my laptop and booked a one-way ticket. No plan, no return date, just a decision made out of desperation more than bravery. My children thought I had lost my mind. My friends said I was running away from my problems. Maybe they were right. But staying felt like slowly disappearing. And I had already disappeared enough. The flight was the longest of my life. 20 hours of doubt. When I landed in Denpasar, the heat hit me like a wall. The air smelled like flowers and exhaust fumes and something frying nearby. Nothing like home. Nothing like anything I had known. The first 2 weeks were brutal. I had rented a small house near Ubud, thinking the postcard photos meant paradise. Instead, I found geckos on my ceiling, mosquitoes that seemed to love foreign blood, and a language I couldn't understand, no matter how many times I repeated it back. I got lost twice trying to find a grocery store. I paid too much for a taxi because I didn't know any better. I sat on my porch one evening, surrounded by the sound of insects I couldn't name, and I cried harder than I had in years. I called my daughter that night. I told her I had made a mistake. I told her I was coming home. She didn't say much. She just listened, the way she used to when she was a little girl scared of thunderstorms. I hung up the phone, feeling more alone than I had felt in Manchester, and that frightened me more than anything. The next morning, I decided to walk to the small warung down the road, the one I had been avoiding because I couldn't read the menu. An older woman ran it, maybe close to my age, with kind eyes and flour on her hands. I pointed at random to something on a handwritten sign. She laughed gently, not unkindly, and shook her head. She waved me over to the counter instead, spooned rice and vegetables onto a plate, and set it in front of me without a word. I ate in silence. It was simple food, nothing extraordinary. But it was warm. and for the first time in 2 weeks, someone had looked at me and seen a person, not a confused foreigner to tolerate. When I tried to pay, she waved her hand and pointed to a chair, gesturing for me to sit. I stayed there for 2 hours. We barely shared a language, but somehow we shared a conversation. Through gestures, through her showing me photos of her grandchildren, through my showing her photos of mine. Her name was Wayan. Over the following weeks, I came back almost every day. She began teaching me small words. Terima kasih. Selamat pagi. She introduced me to her neighbors, to the man who fixed motorbikes, to the children who ran through the streets in the evening, calling out, "Hello, mister," with enormous grins. Slowly, the unfamiliar streets began to feel less like a maze and more like a neighborhood.